Welcome back to Occult Archives, where we take these deep dives into the mysteries surrounding history's most feared and whispered about books.
Yeah.
You know, from grimoires to ancient texts. And today we're going to be exploring a book for our 174th deep dive. It's Frater Achad's Crystal Vision Through Crystal Gazing.
So we're going to be talking about crystals.
Yeah, crystals, but not just like, pretty
Oh,
crystals.
right.
We're talking about crystals as a tool, right, to develop what Achad calls clear vision.
Yeah, and even connect with, other planes of existence.
Exactly. I mean, it is called crystal vision through crystal gazing, so
It's right there in the title.
that's right there, yeah. So we're going to unpack this ancient art, as Achad puts it, and see what Achad says about how to use crystals to gain self-knowledge, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He's not presenting it as, just sort of a fanciful belief.
Right.
He's saying that this is a very specific technique, and he's going to lay out the principles of it.
Absolutely. And in the foreword, he actually lays out his three main purposes in writing the book.
Okay.
The first one is that he wants to provide a clear method for crystal gazing
Right.
and also for preparing the crystal.
Yeah, it's not just staring into any old crystal, right?
No. There's a process here.
It has to be the right crystal, and it has to be prepared properly.
Exactly. His second point that he makes in the foreword is that he wants to show that the methods that he's going to describe, these ancient methods, are more scientific than they might appear.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he thinks they were designed specifically to bring about certain kinds of visions and to connect the gazer with intelligences of a higher order.
So he saw this as a legitimate means of, scientific exploration in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then his third point is that he wants to point out that there are other crystalline spheres that exist. So the crystal ball that you use for gazing is just the beginning.
It's a stepping stone.
Yeah, to something greater.
So he's really laying out a whole path here.
He is. And it all starts with the actual crystal itself,
Right.
the lesser crystalline sphere, as he calls it. And he starts off chapter 1 talking about how it's really important to actually use a crystal. He says, reading about crystal gazing without a crystal is like reading a menu when you're hungry but you don't have any food.
So he's emphasizing the practical aspect of it.
Absolutely. You got to actually do it.
Right, put it into practice.
Yeah. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to need to select a crystal.
Okay.
And he talks about this magnetic attraction that people feel to crystals. And historically, crystals were often kept away from people who were uninitiated.
Oh, so there was an element of secrecy.
Yeah, kept secret. But he says that that's shifting in modern times.
Okay, so it's becoming more accessible.
Right. More people are interested in self-development, and they're using crystals as a tool.
Interesting how those things shift over time.
Right. Now, in terms of actually selecting a crystal, he gives us some guidance.
Okay.
He says it should be between 2.5 and 4 inches in diameter.
So not tiny, but not gigantic either.
Right in the middle.
Okay.
And more important than size, though, he says you need to be drawn to the crystal.
So like a feeling.
Yeah, almost like you have a sense of affection for it. And he knows, of course, that, you have to spend money on it.
Sure.
But he says you should prioritize that intuitive attraction.
Oh, okay. So go with your gut, basically.
Yeah. Now, he also talks about the purity of the crystal and how that relates to the purity of soul of the person who's going to be using it.
Ah, so there's a connection there.
Right. So you've got your crystal. Now you need to prepare it.
Okay, so what does that involve?
Well, the first thing you got to do is choose a room.
Oh, okay, so set the stage.
Yeah. And it should be a room that feels, serene and pleasant and a place that you have good memories associated with.
To create the right atmosphere.
Yeah. And then you hold the crystal with your eyes closed.
Okay.
And you quiet your mind and you try to raise your consciousness to the highest ideal.
So you're preparing yourself mentally.
Right. And you're sort of aligning yourself with the crystal's inherent calmness.
And then what?
Then you open your eyes
Yeah.
and you look into the crystal.
Okay.
And he says that you should feel a sense of purity when you do that.
Like looking into the eyes of a child.
Right. And then he explains that even though the crystal might look physically perfect, it might have absorbed some influences from its previous environment.
Ah, makes sense. It's been handled by other people, been in other places.
Right. So it needs to be purified and consecrated and initiated.
So a 3-stage process.
Yeah. And he goes into a lot of detail.
Let's hear it.
All right. So for purification, you're going to place the crystal on a stand on a clean surface.
Okay. Nothing else around.
Right. Got to get rid of all those extraneous energies. And you form a circle with your fingertips and thumbs. and you visualize a pure astral film within that circle.
Like an energy bubble.
Yeah. And then you pass your hands down over the crystal through that circle, and you're trying to demagnetize the crystal with your hands.
To cleanse it of any previous influences.
Right. And the goal is to have this feeling of cleanliness when you're done.
Interesting.
And then you don't want to touch the crystal right after that.
Okay.
Then you move on to consecration.
Yeah. So what happens there?
This is where you're dedicating the crystal to a specific mission.
Okay.
And that mission is to represent your own pure soul.
So it's becoming a very personal tool.
Yes, yes. So you form an equilateral triangle with your hands over the crystal, and you concentrate on positive energy flowing into it.
Like you're charging it up with your own intentions.
Exactly. And you're guided by your true will in this process.
True will meaning.
Like your highest purpose, your most authentic desire.
Okay. Got it.
And then there's the specific hand movement.
Interesting.
You pass your hands over the crystal in a triangular pattern, you encircle it, and then you grasp it gently.
Like you're infusing it with life.
Right. And at this point, Achad actually includes a warning from John Melville, who says that if the crystal is used for evil purposes, it can backfire.
Oh, wow. So there are some potential consequences.
Yeah. He says it can have a terrible effect.
Okay, so the energy you put into it really matters.
Yes, yes. And then the last stage of preparation is initiation.
Okay, so how do you initiate a crystal?
Well, he says that it's partly accomplished through the consecration process itself.
Okay.
Because you're dedicating it to a purpose and you're charging it with your will.
Right.
But then after that, he says you should leave it undisturbed for a bit.
Just let it sit there.
Yeah, a test of the patience.
Yeah.
And then he says to wrap it in silk for protection and also to keep it polished.
Okay, so like a little cocoon for your crystal.
Yeah. He even suggests colors for the silk.
Oh, interesting. Like,
Rose pink,
okay.
gray, black, or just black.
I wonder if those colors have specific meanings.
Right. So that's your lesser crystalline sphere all prepared.
Okay, so what's next?
Well, now we move on to chapter 2, which Achad calls the greater crystalline sphere.
And what's that?
And that is you.
Oh, the person doing the gazing.
Exactly. Because he says very clearly that your attitude and your inner condition will determine the results that you get.
So it's not just about the crystal itself.
No, the crystal is just a tool.
It's about the person using it.
Right. He talks about the difference between idle curiosity and genuine interest.
Okay.
And he says even if you start with curiosity, it can develop into something more if you're willing to do the work.
So be open to the possibilities.
Right. The key is that you have the seer and you have the crystal, and the way they interact is what leads to clear vision.
It's a partnership.
Right.
Sure.
So Achad asks you to examine yourself. He says, why are you attracted to crystal gazing? What is it that you're looking for?
Yeah, what are your motivations?
Right. He gives some examples.
Okay.
You know, do you want to see the future? Are you looking for love? Are you looking for power?
Common things people might be seeking.
Yeah. And he says that if your motives are vague, your visions will be vague.
That makes sense.
Then he brings up this interesting idea that a true vision is to awakement, as awakement is to a dream.
Wow, that's pretty deep.
Right. So even the clearest vision is still just a reflection of a greater reality.
Okay.
And that's why it's so important to cultivate honesty of purpose and get rid of negative tendencies.
So inner purification is just as important as purifying the crystal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he compares the crystal to the human soul, saying that the crystal is fixed in its form, but the human soul is more plastic.
Meaning it can be molded and shaped?
Right, and that ties into the potential for transformation.
I see.
Now, here's where he throws in a bit of a curveball.
Okay.
He says there's a good chance that the crystal you bought is actually made of glass.
Oh, so it might not be a real crystal.
Right, because real crystals are rare and they're expensive.
Makes sense.
So he talks about the hexagonal structure of true crystals.
Okay.
And how that relates to the hexagram and the macrocosm, like the universe or God.
Okay, so the crystal structure is symbolic.
Right. And he compares the glass sphere to an impure soul.
Ah, so it's a metaphor.
Yeah. The first lesson, he says, is don't be deceived by appearances.
Because what you see might not be the whole truth.
Right. And then he goes on to talk about books on crystal gazing. And he says that a lot of them are not very good.
Oh, so you have to be careful what you read.
Exactly. He says a lot of them are just written to make money.
Sure.
And he mentions John Melville's book, Crystal Gazing and Clairvoyance, as a good one.
Okay.
But he points out that it's out of print and that it was plagiarized by L.W. de Lawrence.
Really? Someone plagiarized a whole book on crystal gazing.
Yeah. And Achad even brings up the law of karma, the
Yeah.
idea that what goes around comes around.
Right, so there are ethical implications even in the occult world.
Yeah. So that's another lesson. Don't just rely on the appearance of a source.
Got it. Always be discerning.
Absolutely. Question everything.
Okay, so we've chosen a crystal, we've prepared it, we've examined our motivations, and we've learned to be discerning about our sources.
Right. Now it's time to actually start practicing.
So how do we actually gaze into the crystal?
Well, Chapter 3 is all about the first steps in practice.
Okay.
And Achad acknowledges that you're probably eager to start seeing visions.
Makes sense. That's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, you want to know the past, present, future.
Right.
But he reassures us that as long as your intentions are good, nothing bad will happen.
Okay, good to know.
And he says that even if you don't get dramatic visions right away, the practice itself is good for you.
How so?
It can improve your concentration and expand your mind.
So there are benefits even beyond seeing visions.
Right. So he lays out some rules for practice.
Okay, let's hear them.
And these are mostly from John Melville, although Achad adds his own comments.
Okay.
First, you need to choose a quiet room, no distractions.
No TV, no phone.
No. And no mirrors or bright colors either.
Okay.
You want the room to be comfortable temperature, not too hot, not too cold.
So like Goldilocks.
Exactly. He even gives the specific temperature range.
What is it?
60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, so cool room.
Yeah. But then he adds in parentheses that people with different temperaments might prefer it a little warmer or a little cooler.
Sure.
Then you got to screen off any firelight or artificial light because you don't want reflections in the crystal.
Makes sense.
The room shouldn't be completely dark, though.
Okay, so just dimly lit.
Right. So you've got your crystal on a stand or a black velvet cushion.
Okay.
And you put some black silk around the base of it to cut off reflections.
So really trying to minimize those.
Absolutely. Now, here's an important point. He says don't expect to see anything at first.
Oh, so you might have to practice for a while.
Yeah, and the key is not to give up.
Patience.
Right. He says the three most important things are calmness, patience, and perseverance.
So like any skill, it takes time and practice.
Exactly. So you start with 10-minute sessions.
Okay.
And you just gaze at the crystal calmly, not staring intensely, just a gentle gaze. And he even suggests you put your watch far enough away that you can see the time, but you can't hear it ticking.
To minimize the distractions.
Right. After 10 minutes, you carefully put the crystal away in a dark, locked place.
So keep it safe and secure.
Yeah, and only you should handle it.
Okay.
Then for the next 5 or 6 sessions, you can increase the time to 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then gradually increase it from there.
Yeah.
But never go over an hour.
So slowly build up your stamina.
Right. And if there are other people in the room with you, they have to be completely silent.
Okay.
And they have to stay far away from you.
So you need your space.
Yeah, because it can distract you, and also because your consciousness is more open when you're doing this practice.
Oh, so you're more sensitive to outside influences.
Exactly. Now, in terms of what you might actually see, he describes what happens when crystalline vision begins.
Okay, I'm curious.
First, the crystal might look dull or cloudy.
Okay.
You might see little pinpoints of light, like tiny stars, and the crystal itself might seem to appear and disappear as if it's in a mist.
So a little hazy.
Yeah. And eventually, he says, you might see a blue or bluish ocean, and that's where the visions will start to appear.
Oh, so it's like a backdrop for the visions.
Right. Then he gives some extra hints.
Okay.
Don't use the crystal right after you eat.
Okay.
Eat digestible foods, avoid alcohol, get some exercise, be content.
So general healthy living advice.
Yeah. Mental anxiety and illness are not good for crystal gazing.
Makes sense.
And he mentions that proper breathing is important.
I can see how that would be.
Now, in terms of the timing of the visions, he says you'll develop a sense for that over time. But generally, things in the background of a vision are further away in time.
Okay, so the perspective gives you a clue.
And things that are closer are more likely to be in the present or near future.
That makes sense.
And he says that there are two main types of visions. Symbolic visions, like you might see a flag or a boat.
Okay.
And then actual scenes or people.
So some are more literal than others.
Right. And he warns that you shouldn't jump to conclusions about the meaning of symbols and that there are entities that might try to deceive you.
Like those elementals he mentioned earlier.
Yeah. He says positive people are more likely to see symbolic visions.
Okay.
And passive people are more likely to see literal scenes.
Interesting.
And then he stresses how important it is to be truthful and unselfish and grateful and to trust in divine guidance.
So it's not just about technique.
No.
It's also about character.
Right. Cultivate those inner qualities.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get the picture. It's not just about the crystal itself.
Right.
It's about your own inner development and your connection to something greater.
That's a great way to put it.
Hmm.
So there you have it. Those are the first steps in crystal gazing,
Okay.
according to Frater Achad and John Melville.
So now that we've learned about the lesser crystalline sphere and the greater crystalline sphere of the practitioner themselves, what about those other crystalline spheres that Achad mentioned?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
You know, the ones beyond the physical crystal ball.
Right. We didn't have time to get into that today, but something to think about.
Yeah. Because if the physical crystal is a tool for developing clear vision, could there be other levels of crystal vision?
Yeah. Maybe even a universal crystalline sphere.
Or that star that some traditions talk about.
Right. The one that's said to be within each of us.
So perhaps Achad is pointing towards something much bigger here.
Exactly. Something to ponder as you start your own 10-minute practice.